What happened in Bhopal on December the 3rd, 1984, shocked the world. People kept dying in the days that followed. And even more lay near death in hospital. Those who could get out of Bhopal did. But what led to this enormous catastrophe remained a mystery. A spokesman for Union Carbide said the company was as surprised as anyone.
We are shocked that this could happen in view of the fact that we have for 20 years more or less made and used the material which seems to be implicated.
But the company was ignoring something else. That for years critics had called on them to move away from the city to areas less vulnerable to the threat of something going wrong. So the people of Bhopal weren't convinced by Union Carbide's explanation. They demanded compensation and sued for billions of dollars.
Looking for Mr. Anderson?
And this man, Warren Anderson, Union Carbide's chairman at the time, became the most hated man in India.
We are fighting now for justice for those affected by the gas. We have lost our children. That Warren Anderson of Union Carbide should be tried in the courts of Bhopal. When we were inhaling the gas, we were thinking, who is the damned person who is in charge? And who gave the license for this poisonous factory?
In fact, when Anderson came to Bhopal soon after the disaster, he was arrested.
Can you tell us exactly who you've arrested, sir? Huh? Can you tell us exactly who you've arrested?
Mr. Gokhale, Mr. Manohar, and Mr. Anderson. These are the three names they have given us.
But custody for Anderson didn't last long, as the man who made that arrest recently recalled.
Well, he got bail because the bail was possible for him to take. The situation warranted that we gave him bail, we gave him bail. He applied for bail and got it.
Satyanath Sarangi arrived in Bhopal the day after the disaster. He came to help for a few weeks. 23 years later, he's still here, running a free medical clinic for those affected.
We realized soon that the government had to be pressured because we knew that most of the people were poor people, among the poorest in the city. And for the government, as we know historically, as I knew historically, that these were people who would be considered expendable. And I didn't think that should be allowed to happen.
An out-of-court settlement was reached between Union Carbide and the Indian government in 1989. More than 500,000 people were awarded compensation. The sum was just over $2,000 per family. Yasmin Khan was one of those who received a check. Permanently disabled, with no use of her legs, the compensation barely covered her medical costs.
I got compensation, but it was inadequate. The money was so less that I could not be treated. The medicines are so expensive. When we go, they say I have to be operated. If I spend the money on treatment, then what will I eat?
Lawyer Satish Tiwari says the issue of compensation has been difficult, but also misunderstood.
This is the worst industrial disaster in the world. And I think the magnitude of the number of people involved for the compensation is something which is unprecedented anywhere in the legal history of the world. More than 500,000 people have been given compensation. So, see, it's very difficult to blame the judicial system for not doing its job properly.
But anger swept through the victim community. The survivors felt cheated. To them, the agreed-upon compensation didn't fit the horror they were still living through. Bhopal today, and more than 2 decades after the gas leak, the compensation is all gone. But members of a new generation of gas victims have begun their lives as unsuspecting inheritors of an ugly legacy. Hazra B thought she'd lost her infant son that night 23 years ago. As it turned out, he survived, but only to live a life of constant challenges.
Today my son is 27 years old, but he can't earn a living. We got him married, but now we have to take care of him and his wife. He has learned some repair jobs of water coolers, but the work only lasts for 3-4 months in a year. There are thousands of children like mine. People in other cities don't marry them, saying that all the children of Bhopal are gas affected.
The abandoned Union Carbide plant still exists, and it's still destroying lives. Toxic chemicals fill the buildings, leaching into and contaminating parts of the city's water supply. It's caused disease and slow poisoning, making victims out of victims one more time.
We have about 200 people coming every day. These people have a history of gas exposure or exposure to contaminated water or both. The problems that we most commonly find are breathlessness, diminished vision, loss of appetite, very common, menstrual disorders of a whole range among women. We find people with numbness and tingling in their limbs, with brain problems in the nervous system. And then we find a whole host of mental health problems, depression, anxiety disorders, panic attacks, insomnia. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we find rising people coming with cancers, leukemia, a lot of people with leukemia.
Dow Chemicals bought Union Carbide in 2001, but it rejects any civil liability for the continuing fallout of what happened in 1984, arguing simply that the disaster was before its time. But recently, there have been suggestions of a compromise, an out-of-court settlement with the Indian government that would see Dow pay something in return for New Delhi allowing it new investment opportunities in the country, perhaps even in Bhopal, a prospect that worries those who lived through the disaster.
So we have yet to learn that before inviting such kind of companies in our country, we must ensure that the environmental issues on priority before giving them a license to operate this way.
As for Warren Anderson, some of the victims remain desperate to have him pay a different kind of price for their suffering.
He's not worth being called a man. He's not a man. If he's a man, he should come here and see how we are dying.
For so many questions to remain unanswered for more than 2 decades after Bhopal's long night of agony is something that haunts those who have suffered and those who have tried to help.
The irony was that the victims were made like culprits. So here we had victims with very few had literacy skills, very few had access to documents, and the victims were expected to prove their case and establish that they were indeed entitled to this compensation sum.
But despite that, they're still determined to pursue justice on behalf of their dead relatives.
Imagine the state of the families of the dead. We will not keep quiet. We will fight in every way we can. We are the survivors of the dead. Will the mothers like us or the widows keep quiet? We will keep fighting all our lives. We will curse them. We are already dead. Who will kill us? Nobody can keep us quiet. Nobody can keep the truth hidden.
The gas turned them into a death trap.
What happened here on that December night in 1984 gave the world a name that will forever be linked to the world's worst chemical disaster, Bhopal.
How people proved and showed their resilience has moved me most. I won't there have been instances where people were trying to protect their lives. They forgot their children sleeping in the house and they ran away to protect their lives. But what has moved me most is the resilience and the prowess of the city to pull their threads and rebuild their lives. And that is, I think, a lesson for everybody.
As well as the terrible physical costs, the horrifying images of that night are seared into the minds of all who saw them.
It was the first time that I witnessed such a ghastly tragedy, all happening in front of my eyes. And I really thank God that all my family members were safe, But then again, when I saw the people around me, that was something which I'd never forget, something which should never have happened.
But happen it did. A tragedy for Bhopal, a lesson for the world.